Sam Fowles, barrister and commentator, and Harrison Griffiths, who's communications officer at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Good morning to the two of you.
Good morning.
I wasn't going to start on this, but I think I better. Civil servants. Now, I imagine, Sam, you're going to have something to say about that. Look, they've been told, come into the office 2 days a week, that's all you've got to do, and they'd say no.
Well, why are we wasting time moaning about whether people are in the office or not in the office?
Because you're more productive in the office.
What are you?
Yes.
Though? That is, there's not a lot of evidence for that. There's a huge amount of evidence that actually you're more productive working from home. As a barrister, I have argued a number of cases from home. I do my advice work from home, and I've never been more productive in my life. And huge numbers of people are like
exemplary.
That. Well, I don't think I am, and I think that it's more. We should be, rather than sort of this really performative thing of going into the office and showing up and presenteeism. What we should be focusing on is the civil service delivering on what it needs to deliver on.
No.
And we all agree that it's not. But it has nothing to do with whether they're working from home.
Well,
it's to do with bad leadership.
OK, before Dr. Rennie comes in, because I can see her chewing her fingernails. Harrison, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I do agree in part. You know, some of the studies into the impact of working from home on productivity are very classic examples of spurious correlations, and I think you need to study this over time. And also, you certainly can't generalise to the extent where it's like every single person is less productive. There's going to be some tailoring involved in there. The civil service being bad is not a new issue. This was going on before COVID and has been, going on since. So I think there's probably a little bit more to it than that.
But if we pay for them and we want them in the office, they should go to the office.
Well, who exactly wants them in the office?
The electorate. I do. I'm paying for them.
Speak on behalf of tens of millions of people in this country? I think what most people really want is good outcomes from the civil service. I don't think they care where that happens.
I agree, they do. But at the moment, they're not getting good outcomes. I mean, HMRC can't even keep itself open for a full year because it just can't cope with its workload.
That's a great point.
Yes.
I know of children's social workers working from home. In my opinion, as someone who cares desperately about child safeguarding, that is a child safeguarding disaster waiting to happen as people fall through gaps. Because when you sit around a table like this, and I'm sitting here talking about Mrs. Smith and her family, you might say to me suddenly, Sam, oh, I had something with that family and you need to know this. That doesn't happen when you're working in your living room on your own.
So it's a really interesting point, and we've discussed this a great deal. I can work from home some of the time, obviously not when I'm doing this, but actually being in the office, I do think you get camaraderie, you get time to talk and discuss, and actually we fire off ideas which you never can replicate on Zoom, for example.
Well, I mean, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, I think. Yes, it's perfectly capable of firing off ideas via text or via WhatsApp or via group chat, and perfectly capable of having discussions on Zoom. We've ran an entire country on Zoom for 2 years.
Look what it did. Look what it did to the economy.
Well, but not because of Zoom, because it was really, really terribly managed, again, at the top.
That's not true. We've had babies die because social workers weren't going to the houses physically.
We've seen...
Well, OK, first, social workers work for local authorities, so we're talking about civil servants here, which is
I agree, but we're just
that's a very different question.
We're talking in generality about the merits of working from home.
Let's talk. So, in talking in a generality, the different professions work differently in different contexts. So coming forward with a big general, even if for a big general civil service thing, saying get them into the office on this one rule 2 days a week, is an absolutely ludicrous way of improving productivity. What you need to be able to do is give people the trust and autonomy and training to be able to understand how they work best and deliver on it. And you need to give them the leadership to provide that.
Can I just ask you, Harrison, is this a generational thing? Because maybe Rennie and I are just really old. Is it a generational thing?
Well, I don't know. I think, when it comes to civil servants, you are talking about a group of people that kind of disproportionately skews away from the old and away from the very young as well. It's kind of that middle group of people. So I'm not sure you can necessarily call it generational. I mean, I think when there's a danger of talking too broadly. So if you're talking about social workers, obviously the distinction that you just made, Sam, there between local and national civil service. If you're talking about social workers, that seems to me obviously a case where, having people there in
obviously
person.
Not happening.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Right?
But that seems obviously a case where there ought to be, a little bit more of a clampdown. But that's not necessarily true for every single kind of role that you take up in the civil service. So I think we should be wary of talking too broadly about what this does.
I think this is quite reflective of what people are saying at home. Good morning, guys, says Colin by WhatsApp. There's a simple way of getting the civil service back working, is they have to reapply for their jobs. It's about time someone grows a backbone and stops pussyfooting around. We're a broken country and a laughingstock around the world. I mean, I do have to agree. I can't get through to anyone. If I get put in another automated queuing system because someone's feeding their cat and sitting at home, I want them in the office.
And your call is very important.
Put in automated queuing systems because people are feeding their cat. You're getting put in automated queuing systems because companies have realised that it's much cheaper to not bother with any sort of customer service. That's nothing to do with workers. That's to do with bosses, and it's also to do with bosses in the civil service. The reason this country is a laughingstock is because of the people at the top. It's not the people that are trying to implement every latest ridiculous directive from the government. It's the people that are giving the directives.
There is obviously a demand from employees to work from home more.
Absolutely,
I mean, that's something that employers are responding to.
I actually know women who are now working at home whilst doing their childcare because it's cheaper. They don't have to employ. You cannot, and I'm a mother. You cannot work and do your childcare.
Yeah, I agree. So let's look at childcare. The government promised that we were going to everyone was going to have a huge extension of childcare, and they didn't think to actually provide the childcare places.
Well, to be fair to the government, of course that is changing. Let's just move on.
But it's not changing, David. There's not enough places for them to actually deliver on the promise.
But more government childcare subsidies is not going to solve the issue. It's actually massively contributed to the significant rise in childcare costs since the year 2000. I mean, it's gone up about 193%, whereas inflation's been about 80% since 2000, wages 86%, childcare 193%.
No, indeed.
There is this spiral of regulation and subsidies that needs to end. More government intervention is not going to solve the problem.
It's not government intervention that's causing that. It's the fact that
it's mandatory staff to child ratios, for example, among the strictest in Europe.
But the private sector has been able to run untrammeled profits off that. So
hang on a minute, substantiate that because most nurseries lose money.
And close.
You've seen unprecedented closures over the last 20 years or so.
Yeah, exactly. Because we have over the last 20 years we've seen unprecedented closures because we've seen childcare budgets not keeping up with what is necessary.
That's just not true. Government spending on childcare has massively increased. They've been spending money to try and solve a problem of their own creation. No. Government regulations have created an artificial scarcity of childcare in the UK, and so the government spends money in order to stop that rather than actually solving the root cause of the problem. So you've got this spiral. You've got this spiral which just keeps increasing costs and chucking more money at the same amount of supply.
Government spending hasn't kept up with demand. We have a huge amount, like one of the largest sections in the country of people who are outside the workforce and not able to work are people with caring responsibilities. And because the market is incapable of properly compensating the caring work that mainly women do.
Hang on a minute. Wait. You're conflating. No, you are conflating two completely different things to make your point. So we were talking about childcare, and now suddenly we're talking about carers. They're very different.
Yeah. Well, no, caring can also.
They're very different. They're very different.
This is
two. But it's part of the same problem, which is that we don't properly reward.
But to be fair to the government, and I will be fair to the government is trying to address that and is putting in more steps to help people with childcare. I do want to move on though, but I do want to do this sensitively and talk about Israel and Gaza. Now, we've seen these terrible stories, of course, about the civilians that have been killed in Gaza. Now, the family of a British aid worker killed by an airstrike in Gaza have criticised the sale of arms to Israel. This is a very hot political issue. Rishi Sunak, under growing pressure after the strike, it killed Britain's John Chapman, James Kirby, as well as Australian, Palestinian, American, Canadian and Polish nationals. Now, we also, on the back of this, have had quite significant numbers of letters, 600 or so legal experts, 3 former Supreme Court judges also saying we need to suspend arms to Israel. Now, to be clear, the United Kingdom actually, our arms sales to Israel make up 0.4% of our arms in this country. Now, the question, and it is a difficult one, in that essentially what we're now seeing is calls for the UK to stop selling arms to Israel. The flip side and the argument to continue is because Israel was attacked.
Yeah, you cannot tolerate the, I think, negligent killings of your own citizens by a foreign nation without some semblance of accountability. My problem on this, however, is the problem I have generally speaking is that I think there's an awful lot to criticise about the way that Israel has handled the kind of the counter-attack, as it were, to that awful set of aggressive acts on October the 7th. But there is always a double standard when it comes to Israel that isn't applied to other countries.
Thank you.
So when I'm not sure whether Baroness Hale has been an avid campaigner to stop arms sales to Saudi Arabia since she left the Supreme Court. I don't know if she has, but I really hope she has. Well, because this is kind of the problem. We sell arms to Azerbaijan. We sell arms to Saudi.
Our biggest supply. We supply our biggest amount, 2.7 billion, to Qatar.
Yeah.
We do.
And then Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia have been responsible for, interestingly, the coalition-led death of 306,000 people in the Middle East.
So can I just ask you, if I may, Sam, just in terms of that, when you've got a former Supreme Court judge, Lady Hale, there, and also you've got people like Lord Sumption's response was quite significant, I thought. He said the framework of international law around war does not mean countries can act however they want, even if they have been provoked or attacked. However, outrageously, you cannot go around indiscriminately slaughtering innocent civilians and children. You cannot attack aid convoys. And the rhetoric, and we talked about this on the show yesterday, the rhetoric from countries, including the United States, is definitely hardening. I mean, I think Biden's response to Netanyahu, I mean, he said he was pretty outraged at what was going on. How much of this is actually Netanyahu and his fight to retain his political office?
I think a huge amount of this problem is Netanyahu and Likud and its far-right coalition more broadly. The problem we have, and that is that it's a problem with many international relations situations, but particularly this one now, is you have a leadership that is invested and has an interest in continuing this war and continuing the killing.
Why would he have that interest?
Because so long as there is a fight, so long as there is danger, his political pitch to Israelis works. If this was resolved, there will be no need for Likud, because Likud's entire political pitch has been about preventing a two-state solution. And in fact, the Netanyahu government was facilitating the funding of Hamas up until very close to the 7th of October in order to split the Palestinian people so that they couldn't unite around a two-state solution. So you're saying there was no due diligence
on where that money went?
No, I'm not saying there was no due diligence. I'm saying there is statements on the record from Netanyahu that it is a deliberate policy to fund Hamas, to keep a split between Hamas and the PLO so they can't unite around a two-state solution.
I will come back to Dr. Renning because I know she'll have something to say on this, but just in terms of the president, he said to Netanyahu, these strikes are on humanitarian workers, and remember, they were humanitarian workers. Not only that, Israel knew where that convoy was. They had agreed route. They knew exactly where that was going. Also, those vehicles were 1.5 miles apart, 3 separate missile strikes. He went on to say that this is unacceptable, and the president said they need to implement specific, concrete and measurable steps to address civilian harm, humanitarian suffering and the safety aid of workers. Rishi Sunak also said to Netanyahu, if you do not introduce humanitarian aid, we will declare Israel in violation of international humanitarian law. We've also seen all of these responses from the international community. I don't know how you stand on this. How do we move forward? What happens? Does Sam have a point that actually this is actually Netanyahu has a lot of blame?
Yeah, he's I think has always been an unhelpful actor in this, in the various attempts to revive the peace process in the Middle East. And to be fair, there is an awful lot of anger, it seems, as very much an outside observer in Israel, about why Israel was unprepared for this attack, despite various warning signs, and how Israel has responded. He and his coalition partners are not performing well in the polls, so it looks, as I understand it at the moment, quite likely that if there were a general election tomorrow, Netanyahu would be out, and I think that can only be a good thing. But, when it comes to ensuring humanitarian aid and humanitarian convoys can get to where they need to be, this is absolutely essential. I mean, I mentioned Azerbaijan before, who we sell arms to, an awful petro-state, serial human rights abuser that was responsible for the ethnic cleansing of 100,000 Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh several months ago. Even they were kind of opened themselves in the end to protecting the Lachin corridor between Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh to allow refugees to move and aid to move in and out. So, given that even Azerbaijan can kind of suck it up for a little while, I think the Israelis need to
I
step
think that's
up.
a very balanced and a very interesting way of putting it. However, we must also remember that even if Netanyahu is going to go tomorrow, that doesn't take away the threat from Hamas, which will rearm itself and slaughter Israelis again.
Yes.
But second to that, lots of this aid, as it enters the country, is having Hamas militia jump on it, kill the lorry drivers and steal it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on
Does
here.
that mean we shouldn't be sending aid in?
No, of course not. Of course it isn't. But we should be trying to get it to the people who actually desperately need it. But my issue with David this morning, we've had a very heated discussion about this already, is
we have.
Nobody cares about the civilians being killed in Sudan, 33,000 of them, 306,000 in Yemen, 16,500 in Russia. But you're not calling for us not to arm Ukraine.
Yes, I've definitely been calling for sanctions on Russia. I've called for sanctions on Sudan.
Do you want us to stop arming Ukraine?
No, I won't, because Ukraine is defending itself from an assault. Well, no, it's entirely different. You cannot compare these two things.
I would agree.
First of all, before October the 7th, Israel had already killed more Palestinian civilians than at any year since 2005. That doesn't justify October the 7th, but neither does October the 7th justify the way Israel is acting.
So I'm sitting between the two of you here because actually what happened to Israel was absolutely unacceptable, right?
It was. What has that happened to the Palestinian people?
Well, I was about to say. So now we're in a position where you've got 1.5 million people in Gaza. Many of these are innocent people, and they're being told to move south, move north. Then Israel seems to strike. These people are desperate. We've heard there's a humanitarian disaster taking place. We've also got information to the Foreign Office, to Alicia Kearns, saying that UK may be in breach of international humanitarian law. So this is very complex, but at the same time, the pressure is ramping up. You've got Boris Johnson saying we absolutely need to continue to supply Israel with arms. Do you think the public mood is changing?
I don't know, and to be honest, I don't actually think that this is high on the radar of many people outside of the Westminster bubble and various kind of left-wing student groups, to be perfectly honest with you. But it is nonetheless an important issue, and it's really something I can't give a clear talking point or an answer on, because it's horrendously complicated. Both sides have suffered immensely. Both sides have legitimate moral claims that they make, and my heart really goes out to the millions of people on both sides of this who want absolutely nothing to do with the aggressions and the politics of their rulers, who are suffering as a result.
I have to go to break, but so finally, do we stop arms exports, or do we believe the Prime Minister when he spoke to Harry Cole the other night, where he said there is a formal process where we're going through, we are looking at the evidence, and then we will make a decision on that? Is that the right thing to do?
Yes, I think so. I mean, the Israelis have been given an opportunity to respond, and I hope they do.
We cannot stop arming Israel.
The Israelis had 6 months to stop an indiscriminate attack, carpet bombing one of the most densely populated places in the world. The fact that we are still arming them is a moral stain on our character.
But what else are they supposed to do? I genuinely asked that question because...
Sorry, I missed that. Say that again.
What else are they supposed to do? Because I genuinely... I can't... I can't really get to grips with the morality of what Israel is doing in Gaza. You look at the scenes and they are awful, but what else is Israel supposed to do? Yeah. If it has the absolute right to eradicate the people...
I have to go to break.
To eradicate the people who lost
absolute right at all. It does not have that absolute right.
Of Hamas, yes, it does. And how are you supposed to get rid of Hamas without doing what they're doing now? Explain it.
Exactly the way that we advanced nations have fought wars in these situations for decades.
Sam Harrison, Dr. Renee, thank you very much indeed for the moment. We'll continue this fiery debate after this break.
About to sign, those are called...
Goodness
me.
Are you
starting?
Honestly.
No, we're talking.
Yes, good. Welcome back. It's 8:49 on Saturday, April the 6th. As you can tell, Dr. Rennie is in full flow. We're joined this morning by Sam Fowles, barrister and commentator, Harrison Griffiths, communications officer at the Institute for Economic... Shh, we're talking, she says to me. Right, let's move on, because they're still talking about Israel and Gaza. But I want to talk about matters close to home, because, as we know, these strikes, the NHS strikes, have been going on for a very long time indeed. Well, there is some good news, and that is that senior doctors in England have ended their pay dispute with the government. These are the consultants, so just to be clear, basically you're a junior doctor for many, many, many years until finally you become a consultant, and a junior doctor really is a terrible way to describe people who've been in training for a very long time. Now, when you look at what they got a 6% rise in April of 2023, a 4.95% pay rise on top of that annual 6% increase, 2.85% for those between 4 and and 7 years into consultant careers, and separate pay increase for 2024-25, backdated to March 2024. Whoa! They got nearly 20%, some of these doctors. Now, that's one thing. Now, we've got the junior doctors who are still on strike. It's cost £3 billion, this so far, and patients are suffering. We have 20 million people on waiting lists. The system is falling apart. What does this do for the pressure on the junior doctors?
Well, absolutely nothing good, and you know, it never really looks like when you have an announcement of a big breakthrough that it ever actually solves anything in the long run. It's very easy to just kind of sit there and blame the doctors, blame the government, whatever. I think there's an awful lot of blame to go round on multiple sides, but ultimately you have a system here which creates a set of very perverse incentives for all sides to produce bad outcomes. And you know, so let's take Australia for example. You have a system there that costs the taxpayer about 2/3 as much as it costs in the UK, that delivers significantly better healthcare outcomes and delivers far higher wages for doctors and nurses.
So you want to mirror that?
Oh, it would be significantly better for literally every single side.
So what would you do with the junior doctors who are entrenched? And Rennie made a really good point. She thinks it's deeply political.
Yeah, there's certainly a political element to it. So whenever you have a kind of organised trade union where you've got like a monopoly employer in the form of the government, like there is no other employer, it creates a massive incentive for kind of politicised activities, and it gives you a bigger incentive to strike because you can get more out of a single employer rather than on a competitive market. But that is systematic.
So that's really interesting, Sam. I assume you're going to say the junior doctors should dig their heels in.
No, I'm going to say we're looking at this completely wrongly. Firstly, the Australia thing is a complete misnomer because there's not as many people in Australia. So per person, the Australia system is more expensive than the NHS. Secondly, it's completely.
I'm not sure that's true.
It's absolutely true because I had a debate with someone and then I looked it up and did the subs.
Are you talking about total spending per capita or government spending per capita? Because I think government spending is lower, but total spending is higher.
I'm looking at government spending per capita. No, sorry, total spending per capita because that's what people are having to put in themselves as well, which is part of the cost as well.
But do we not agree?
They do also consume more healthcare.
But the point from Harrison, I think, is really valid, which is actually our system is broken. I think we all know it's broken. It can't continue in its current form. We're spending 176 billion pounds a year on it, 11.7% of GDP. It's just totally out of control.
Right, and this is where we're looking at it from the wrong angle. Right. Because we shouldn't be talking about what the responsibility on the doctors is here. It's the job of the government to deliver healthcare. It's the job of the government to employ enough people in the healthcare system to deliver the healthcare that the country needs.
We haven't trained enough
right now.
Well, to be fair to the government, and I'm not always fair to the government, but they are doubling the number of training places. It will take time for doctors to come through. But at the same time, we're losing people. And also, you talk to anyone here, anyone who's watching this programme, and they'll say, I can't see a doctor, I can't get a GP, we've seen 25% of GP practices close, the whole thing's falling apart.
Yeah, and we're losing about 20,000 people a year because other places elsewhere in the world are prepared to pay better, or it's just better to have a job somewhere else.
Rennie will come in on that.
It is the government's job.
Not one of those places that these doctors are going to go to for a better life. And I know I worked in Australia, I know exactly how it works, I know how nice it is. Not one of them is a health system in the way that we have it. We're told constantly that the NHS is the envy of the world. It isn't, because if it was, they'd all be copying it. It doesn't work in its current form. Its scope is too broad and its waste is too massive.
I think its scope is not nearly broad enough because it needs to take on. You need to look at mental health in a much more strategic way.
We involve mental health.
So here is our problem. About 15 years ago, the NHS was one of the most financially efficient and effective healthcare systems in the world. You've had now you've had 15 years of governments playing around with these various sort of flights of fancy, where they're going to introduce market principles into the NHS, and then we're going to spend a load of money to take that market principles back out of the NHS. Then we're going
What would you do with the junior doctors? Time is tight.
I'd pay them what it's going to take.
35%?
Yeah, pay them what it takes them to get back into hospitals, get them treating people.
But then what happens if the nurses who settle for 5% say, right, well, we want 35%?
Yeah, I'd pay them as well. And you know what? I'd be spending less money than the government has spent not coming to an agreement. It will cost about $1 billion to give them what they want. The government has already spent $3 billion posturing and not coming to an agreement.
Final word, Harrison.
Yeah, I mean, you can just keep this cycle going on forever, but the fundamental problem, I mean, you talk about it's the government's responsibility to employ enough people. Tell me how many people is enough people. You can't. Nobody can.
The only way. 9,000 more. That's what the NHS says. 9,000 more.
Why?
Why? We're short of 11,000 doctors, I believe. Anyway,
9,000 vacancies now. So,
Yeah,
in
so
order to meet demand, it's 9,000 vacancies.
We still won't meet demand. Trust me.
Yeah, it's not going to happen, and that's always a very dynamic, ever-evolving process that governments are in absolutely no position to make a decision on. That's why the system's broken, fundamentally.
Thank you very much indeed, Sam Fowles, barrister and commentator, Harrison Griffiths, communication officer at the Institute of Economic Affairs, and Dr. Rennie, who is gently seething.